He died 10 years ago. She started renovating, and accidentally hitting the wall revealed a hidden door that no one knew about. What lay inside put her life in danger. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. Anna stood in the dim hallway, holding a paint catalog she wasn't even sure she liked. The morning light from the kitchen window reached only part way into this narrow corridor, leaving the rest in the familiar half-shadow that had followed her for years. It was as if the house itself refused to brighten, clinging stubbornly to everything it remembered, every argument, every laugh, every silence that followed the night her husband died. 10 years had passed, yet somehow the walls still carried his weight, his presence, and the heavy residue of everything she had never dared to question. She rarely admitted it, even to herself, but the house had become a museum, frozen in a time she had been terrified to disturb. When her husband Michael's car was found twisted around a tree on an empty stretch of rural highway, her world had collapsed in a single night. For months afterward, she moved through rooms like a ghost, fearful of touching the furniture, unwilling to change the curtains, unable to face the sound of her own footsteps echoing back to her. She kept everything the way it had been, the old armchair he loved, the coffee mug he never washed properly, even the layout of the hallway where he once dropped his toolbox after work. The stillness of the house became unbearable at times, but it felt safe in a way nothing else could. It felt like proof that he had once been here, breathing the same air. But time has its own way of pressing forward, and now, with her son Tim nearly 12, the cracks in the ceilings could no longer be ignored. The peeling wallpaper no longer romanticized as old charm, and the damp smell behind the kitchen wall no longer explained away by sentiment. Tim had grown tall enough to notice the warped floorboards and confident enough to point them out. "It's kinda creepy here," he'd said one evening, trying to sound casual. "Like the house is tired." Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she was tired too. It was her sister who finally pushed her to make the call. "You don't have to erase him," she'd told Anna over a cup of tea. "You're not betraying his memory by fixing a wall." Anna had nodded, though the words stung. Betrayal. That was the root of her fear. As if changing the house meant admitting that Michael was truly gone, that his life had ended, and hers would have to continue. It took another 6 months before she picked up the phone and scheduled the renovation. The workers arrived early on a chilly Monday morning, 3 men with dusty boots and easy smiles. They surveyed the house with the kind of enthusiasm people reserve for potential profit. Their chatter filled the quiet spaces Anna had kept sealed for so long, and she found herself stepping back, as though the life she'd preserved was suddenly too fragile to withstand their presence. They examined the living room first, then the kitchen, then the hallway. It was when they reached the corridor that the oldest worker paused, tapping the wall with the back of his knuckles. "This one's strange," he murmured. "Feels thicker than it should be." Anna stood beside him, drawn into the moment despite herself. "Thicker?" "Yeah." He rapped again. A dull, muted thud echoed beneath his hand. Way thicker than the opposing wall. Could be some old reinforcement, or a decorative structure covering something. Hard to say. Something tightened inside her chest. She knew this wall well. Michael had always been oddly protective of it. When she once suggested hanging a shelf there, he'd become agitated, almost angry, telling her it wasn't a good idea. When she asked why, he'd only muttered something about wiring and left the room. She remembered the sharpness in his tone, the way he avoided her eyes. Now, standing in this narrow space years later, the memory surfaced with an uncomfortable clarity. The worker shrugged. "We'll need to take down the panel to see what's behind it." She agreed, though her voice felt thinner than usual. They approached with crowbars and hammers, beginning carefully. The decorative wooden facade that Michael had installed early in their marriage came off surprisingly easily, as if it had been waiting to be removed. Beneath it was a layer of plaster that crumbled at the slightest touch. One strong strike from the crowbar caused a palm-sized section to collapse, sending a cloud of dust into the air. But what lay beneath the plaster wasn't wiring. It was brick. A full brick wall, hastily assembled, the mortar uneven and the color slightly different from the original house structure. It looked added, unlike something someone wanted. Hidden quickly, the workers exchanged confused glances. One of them muttered something about makeshift ceiling and someone didn't want this opened. Anna's heartbeat quickened. She tried to rationalize it. Perhaps Michael had sealed a broken doorway. Perhaps he'd done it for structural reasons. But the more she looked, the more she sensed something deliberate, not structural integrity, but concealment. The workers debated whether to continue, unsure if they were dealing with load-bearing material. The foreman recommended leaving it for the day and coming back with proper tools and maybe a specialist. By early afternoon, the house emptied again, and their footsteps faded down the walkway. Silence seeped in once more, settling into corners like it always had. Anna stood in front of the half-exposed wall long after they left. The air was still dusty, and the corridor smelled of plaster and old wood. She traced her fingers over the rough bricks, feeling the hastily pressed mortar crumble like sand beneath her touch. Something about it unsettled her deeply. She remembered Michael standing just where she stood now, commandingly telling her to leave this wall alone. She remembered how he sometimes paced the hallway at night when he thought she was asleep. She remembered how he used to lock his tools away when she approached. Tim came home in the late afternoon, tossing his backpack on the kitchen table and asking what the workers had done. She avoided the details, telling him they had found something odd behind the wall. He shrugged it off, more interested in a snack than renovation mysteries. But as he went to the living room, he paused, turning back to look down the hallway. He stared at the section of exposed brick. "I remember that," he said. Anna blinked. "What do you mean, remember?" "That wall. It didn't look like this, but I remember something there. When I was really little. Maybe I dreamed it." She wanted to ask more, but he'd already wandered away, leaving her with a faint unease rippling through her thoughts. Children often recalled things strangely, blending memory and imagination. But something about the certainty in his tone stuck with her. Evening settled like a heavy blanket. Tim did his homework, then disappeared into his room. The house grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that pressed against the ears and made every sound feel amplified. Anna stood alone in the hallway, staring at the bricks. The workers would not return until morning. She could wait. She should wait. But the truth was she couldn't. She fetched a small hammer and flashlight from the basement. Her hands trembled as she climbed the stairs again. She felt ridiculous, like a child sneaking where she shouldn't. Yet something stronger than fear, something closer to instinct, propelled her forward. She struck the bricks twice, 3 times. Dust fell. She struck again, harder. A chunk broke free, revealing the faint outline of what looked unmistakably like old wooden frames behind the brick. She began working faster, heart racing. Brick after brick loosened under the force of her strikes. The more she removed, the more she saw old hinges, a narrow seam, chipped paint. A door. A door had been bricked over. Her breath caught. She cleared the remaining bricks with both hands, pushing until her palms burned. When the last one fell away, she stepped back, staring at the old structure revealed before her. It was a double door, faded green, with chipped paint, curling like dry leaves. The wood was old, older than the house itself, it seemed. The handle was tarnished, but the outline of a lock was visible. She touched it gently. Cold metal, colder than it should have been. Why had he hidden this? Why hadn't he told her? And what could be behind it? These questions filled her mind like a rising tide. She knew she should stop. She knew she should wait for the morning, for professionals, for common sense. She knew she should think of Tim sleeping upstairs, depending on her to make good choices. But she also knew she had lived too long in a house full of unanswered questions. She had lived too long in the shadow of a man she adored, but never fully understood. She had spent years convincing herself that silence was safer than truth. Not anymore. She picked up the hammer again, one blow to the rusted lock, another, a third. The lock gave way with a sharp metallic crack that echoed down the hallway like a gunshot. The door creaked open. Cold air spilled out, damp and stale, carrying the faint smell of concrete and time. She lifted the flashlight and stepped inside, heart beating in her throat. The room was small, barely large enough to stand comfortably. No windows, no decorations, just concrete walls, a cracked bulb overhead, and faint outlines where something heavy had once stood. The beam of her flashlight traced the floor, revealing small details that froze her in place. Dark spots on the concrete, faint markings on the wall, and shallow depressions in the floor that hinted at metal bolts or heavy anchors. She swallowed hard, unable to fully process what she was seeing. This was no storage room, no utility space. It was something else entirely. Something built with purpose. She stepped further in. Behind her, the hallway lights flickered softly, almost warningly. But she didn't turn back. She couldn't. Whatever this room was, whatever it meant, whatever secret Michael had buried here, it had waited 10 years for her to find it. And now, she had. The cold in the room deepened, pressing against her skin. Her flashlight trembled slightly as she raised it higher, illuminating the far corner. That was when she saw it. A metal box, sealed with layers of black electrical tape, half hidden in the shadows. Her breath stopped. She felt instinctively that whatever lay inside that box was the beginning of everything she didn't know. She reached for it, and the house, silent for 10 long years, seemed to hold its breath with her. The morning after the first cracks in the wall appeared, Emma woke with the uneasy sense that her house was no longer the same place she had lived in for the past 11 years. It was subtle, something felt rather than seen, like the faint hum of a distant sound just below the threshold of hearing. She lay still for a moment, listening to the breathing of the house around her, trying to decide if she had imagined the shift or if the house itself truly was different now that the secret had begun to surface. Light filtered softly through the curtains of her bedroom, pale and misty, as if hesitant to enter. The night had been restless. She had woken multiple times, each time thinking she heard quiet knocks or the soft scrape of something in the walls. But each time she had risen, the house stood perfectly still, silent, offering no explanation. Now, as she sat up and pressed a hand to her forehead, she wondered if her exhaustion had begun creating phantoms out of ordinary sounds. She forced herself to get up, because routine was the only thing keeping her anchored lately. Breakfast for her son, packing his school bag, checking his homework. Small rituals had become a lifeline after years of grief and struggle. When she stepped into the hallway, she paused again, eyes drifting toward the patched section of wall near the living room, where she had first noticed the uneven texture. The previous evening, she had convinced herself she was overreacting, that the wall had always looked like that, and she simply hadn't paid enough attention before. But now, in the softness of early morning, it looked undeniably wrong. The paint seemed smoother than the surrounding areas, applied with a different hand, a different rhythm. Even the light hit it strangely, flattening its texture instead of revealing it. She lifted her fingers and let them graze the surface, feeling again that faint but distinct inconsistency, as if someone had rushed to conceal something beneath. She stepped away quickly when she heard movement behind her. Liam appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep. His hair stuck out in unruly directions, and his socks didn't match. She couldn't help but smile as she reached for him and straightened the collar of his shirt. "Morning," she said softly. He nodded, still waking. "Is breakfast ready?" "Almost. Go wash your face. I'll get it started." He shuffled to the bathroom, and Emma made her way to the kitchen. The morning routine helped settle her mind a little, but each time she passed the living room doorway, her eyes flickered toward that wall again, unable to ignore the pull of curiosity. Or was it dread? The past she had buried so carefully tugged at her, whispering reminders she had tried to forget. She made coffee, scrambled eggs, and toast. Liam sat at the table eating quietly, swinging his legs under the chair. He was at the age where he was beginning to ask more questions about school, about life, about his father. She tried to be honest with him without burdening him, but every answer felt like navigating a minefield, balancing truth and protection. When he finally left for school, waving before he headed down the street, she stood by the window, watching until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did she let the calm mask slip. Her gaze drifted again toward the living room. Today, she told herself. Today she would understand what this house was trying to show her. She returned to the wall with a determination she hadn't felt the night before. The memory of her husband, Michael, flashed unbidden into her mind. The way he had always dismissed certain parts of the house, the way he had told her not to worry about repairs, the way he had insisted that some rooms didn't need to be touched. Back then, she hadn't questioned him. She had been too in love, too trusting, too naive. And then he died, leaving her with 1,000 unanswered questions and a life that had to be rebuilt from scratch. She stood before the wall, examining it more critically. The baseboard here was newer than the rest of the room. The nails holding it in place were shiny, stainless steel different from the old brass nails used everywhere else in the house. How had she not noticed that before? She crouched down, pressing her hand along the seam between wall and floor. Her fingers brushed a faint indentation, a covered hinge, a hinge that had been plastered over. She froze. Her breath came shallow and quick as she traced the outline of what was unmistakably an access point. Someone had sealed a door here, a door she had never known existed. A door that seemed deliberately hidden, not merely closed off or abandoned. Her heart pounded as she realized the truth, settling cold into her stomach. Michael had lived in this house long before she met him. He had done work here. Repairs, renovations, but also other things he'd never explained. He had always brushed off her questions with a smile and a kiss, saying it was nothing important, just old stuff from before. But this was something he had actively tried to erase. And now, 10 years after his death, the house was offering up what he had buried. She rose slowly, gripping the edge of a small wooden shelf for balance. She had two choices: leave it alone and let the past remain sealed, or break into the wall and face whatever truth Michael had hidden. The latter felt inevitable. With trembling hands, she retrieved a hammer and chisel from the toolbox she kept in the hallway closet. The weight of the tools grounded her, but the anxiety coiling inside her chest only tightened. She returned to the wall, positioned the chisel along a hairline crack she could see now that she was looking with purpose, and tapped lightly. The plaster flaked away easily, too easily. A hollow sound echoed beneath. She pressed her lips together and tapped again, harder this time. More plaster broke off, revealing not the wooden studs she expected, but a smooth, metal surface beneath. That discovery sent a shiver through her. Who puts metal behind a living room wall? And why? She worked with slow, deliberate movements, clearing away the plaster piece by piece. The metal surface beneath gradually revealed a rectangular shape, edges welded crudely. It wasn't part of the original structure. Someone had added this later. Her breath hitched as the truth formed in her mind. This wasn't a normal wall. This was a vault, a hidden room, a chamber. Memories flooded her. Moments she had tried to forget. Late nights when Michael had slipped out of bed thinking she was asleep. Long stretches of time he spent locked away in the basement with the door closed. Mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. Conversations he never let her overhear. Questions he brushed aside with half answers. She had convinced herself those pieces didn't matter after he died. That grief had made her imagine things, that the man she loved couldn't have been hiding something sinister. But standing here now, staring at a secret welded into the bones of her home, she felt foolish for having ignored her instincts. Her hands moved faster, fueled by an urgency she couldn't name. The plaster gave way fully, revealing the entire outline of a narrow metal door, flush with the wall, disguised beneath layers of paint and dust. She scraped away the last of the debris and stepped back, breathing heavily. There it was. A door her husband had built, or sealed. A door she had never known existed. A door she now had no choice but to open. But the handle was no ordinary handle. It was a recessed metal latch, the kind used for industrial storage or reinforced chambers. She hesitated before pulling it, fear prickling down her spine. For a moment she stood perfectly still, imagining what might lie behind it. Boxes? Old equipment? Something harmless? Or something worse? Something tied to the shadows of Michael's past she had worked so hard to forget? She exhaled slowly and pulled. The latch resisted. She pulled harder. It groaned, stiff from years of disuse, and then released with a sharp metallic snap. The door swung inward only an inch or two, just enough for a thin blade of cold air to seep out. The temperature drop was shocking. The air smelled stale, heavy, metallic, like a place untouched by time. Her pulse raced. She pushed the door further, the hinges creaking protest, and a sliver of darkness appeared. A deep, absolute darkness. She fumbled for a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and shone it into the opening. The beam cut through the black, revealing a narrow corridor lined with metal panels. It looked nothing like the rest of the house. No drywall, no wooden beams, no insulation. Just steel. Stark, oppressive steel. Her mouth went dry. Michael built this. He built this before she ever met him. And whatever he used it for was never meant to be found. She stepped inside, the metal floor vibrating faintly beneath her weight. The room extended deeper than she first thought, branching into a small chamber at the end. The flashlight trembled in her hand as she scanned the space. There was a metal table bolted to the ground, a chair, shelves filled with nondescript containers, old technological equipment, coils of wires, a lockbox, a dusty binder with a faded label she could barely make out. Her legs felt weak as she approached the table. Papers lay scattered across it, yellowed but intact. Her eyes caught a phrase written across the top page in her husband's handwriting. Operational record. Phase C. Her breath caught. Her husband had been involved in something organized, something coded, something that had required secrecy beyond anything she could have imagined. Whatever this room was, it wasn't a hiding place. It wasn't a forgotten project. It was a command center. Her flashlight beam landed next on a box, tucked half under the table. She pulled it out with difficulty, the metal scraping loudly across the floor, and opened it. Inside lay photographs, dozens of them. Some were landscape shots. Others were close-ups of people she didn't recognize. Faces, houses, cars, dates scribbled on the backs. Her mind reeled. Michael had been surveilling people, collecting data, tracking movements. The past she believed she shared with him cracked under the weight of the truth she was finally seeing. The man she thought she knew had lived an entire life before her that she had never glimpsed, a life he deliberately kept locked in metal walls buried behind plaster. She stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the ghosts of his secrets, and felt the cold grip of fear curl around her spine. She had no idea where this path would lead, but she knew this was only the beginning. The cold of the secret chamber clung to Emma long after she climbed back into the main part of the house. Even after she shut the metal door, even after she covered the exposed edges with an old sheet so Liam wouldn't notice anything unusual, the chill sank into her bones and refused to leave. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands cupped around a mug of tea she barely tasted, trying to steady her breathing as her mind replayed what she had found in the hidden room. She had always feared there was more to Michael's past than he had ever admitted, but nothing could have prepared her for steel walls concealed behind plaster, for coded documents, for surveillance photos of strangers with dates and coordinates scrawled on the backs. The magnitude of it all made her stomach twist. If he had been involved in something illegal before their marriage, as she now understood, then the metal chamber was not just a place he had built. It was a place he had depended on, and a place he had wanted to bury forever. As the minutes crawled forward, she felt two halves of herself pulling in opposite directions. One begged her to close the wall, hide the room away again, protect herself and her son from the poisonous trail that Michael's secrets had left behind. The other half, the stubborn, exhausted, wounded part of her that had spent years rebuilding her life alone, refused to look away. She stood, unable to remain still any longer, and walked toward the living room. The hallway seemed unusually narrow, as though the house itself had shifted around her discovery, tightening its frame. When she reached the doorway, she paused, steadying herself before pulling the sheet aside. The metal door loomed in the dim light, its edges dusty, its latch slightly bent from her earlier force. The fear she felt was no longer sharp. It was something deeper, quieter, heavier, as if she were pushing her way through thick fog. She reached out and touched the cold surface of the door. It felt like touching a past she had no choice but to confront. She opened it again, just enough to slip inside. The darkness swallowed her instantly. She flicked on her flashlight, the beam cutting across the steel panels. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The documents, the equipment, the box of photographs, the old binder with Michael's handwriting. But standing here now, she noticed something she had overlooked. A metal drawer built into the far wall. It was low, subtle, and flush with the steel, easy to miss unless she was standing at the right angle. Her breath tightened as she crossed the room and crouched in front of it. The drawer handle was small, almost decorative. She tugged, but it didn't budge. She braced her foot against the wall and pulled harder. Something popped loudly, and the drawer slid open an inch. She froze. The smell of dust and stale air seeped out. She opened it completely. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound notebook, a thick manila envelope sealed with tape, and a small metal key attached to a faded orange tag. Her heart pounded as she lifted the notebook first. It was worn, edges soft, cover scratched by years of handling. She recognized Michael's handwriting immediately. Sharp, deliberate strokes, letters formed with precision and tension. She flipped the notebook open and felt her breath catch. These were logs, entries, notes describing movements, deliveries, exchanges, names of people she had never heard of, codes she couldn't decipher. descriptions of vehicles, warehouses, shipments, and dates that stretched back years before she met him. Her throat tightened as she realized the truth. Her husband had kept detailed records of his activities that, from the context of what she was reading, were not legal, nor harmless, nor small. For 12 years of their marriage, he had told her he was a mechanic who had done odd jobs in his 20s. He had been careful, gentle, warm even, after she lost him in the accident that took everything from their family. But this world hidden behind the walls showed a different man, a man she had never truly known. She set the notebook aside, hands trembling, and picked up the envelope. It was thick, stiff from the contents inside. She peeled away the tape carefully, unfolding the flap. Papers filled the inside. Documents, IDs, licenses. All bearing Michael's photograph, but not his name. He had at least 4 aliases, each with corresponding documents so meticulously crafted they looked official. She sorted through the papers, her heart sinking deeper with each new identity. He had lived entire lives without her, entire histories, entire lies. She felt dizzy for a moment, steadying herself with a hand on the steel wall. If he had been involved with others, partners, employers, acquaintances in this hidden world, then what had he been to them? And what had he done in their service? A sudden thought pierced her like ice. If there were people involved in Michael's operations, if he had worked with or for others, then someone somewhere knew about this room, knew about his activities, knew that he had disappeared 10 years ago, and they might still be alive. She stared at the manila envelope again, forcing herself to breathe. She reached inside and found a smaller envelope at the bottom, sealed and marked with Michael's handwriting. Her name. Emma. Her fingers shook violently as she traced the letters. He had written this for her. But why? And when? Before their wedding? During their marriage? Before the accident? She sat on the cold metal floor, gathering the strength to open it. The seal gave with a soft tear, and she unfolded a single sheet of paper. It wasn't long, barely a paragraph, but the words hit her like a blow to the chest. Emma, if you ever find this room, it means I failed to protect you from my past. Everything I hid to keep you safe. There are things you were never meant to see, things that I tried to erase before we built our life. If you find this, do not trust anyone who knew me before you. Do not reach out to them. Do not show them these documents. Destroy everything. Leave the house with Liam and start again somewhere new. I love you. Forgive me. She closed her eyes tightly as grief punched its way through her chest with brutal force. Not for the man Michael had been, but for the man she had believed him to be. The husband she had loved. The father her son had lost. The years she had spent thinking she had known the truth of their life together. He had lived his life in shadows, and he had left her alone with the consequences. She sat there for a long time, the note trembling in her hand, her breath uneven. Forgive him? How could she forgive him when he had never trusted her enough to tell her the truth? How could she forgive him for dragging her into a life built on hidden danger? But how could she hate him either, when he had clearly feared the world he came from so deeply he'd tried to bury it forever? She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, realizing only then that she had begun to cry. Then she remembered the third item, the key. She lifted it carefully. The tag was faded, the writing barely legible. She held it up to the flashlight. Storage, Unit 14B, North Creek, a storage unit. Of course. Michael had sealed his past in more than one place. Her pulse picked up speed as she imagined what else he had hidden away. More documents, equipment, evidence, weapons. Maybe even money he had earned doing whatever illegal work he had been involved in. Or worse, names, lists, contacts. She pressed her hand to her forehead. She had uncovered only the beginning. She stood, clutching the key and Michael's note. The room felt colder now, as if the air had thickened around her. She gathered the notebook, the documents, and the envelope, and backed out of the steel chamber, shutting the metal door behind her. The house suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too full of things she didn't understand. She placed everything on the dining table, turned on all the lights, as though brightness could hold back the darkness creeping into her mind, and sank into a chair. Her thoughts spiraled. What was the right thing to do? Stay silent? Open the rest of the past? Destroy it all like Michael wanted? Or seek answers he had tried to hide? She thought of Liam, his safety, his future, the life she had tried to build for him after losing his father. She imagined him in danger because of something Michael had done, because she hadn't been careful, because she had dug too deep. And yet she knew she could not look away. Michael's secrets had found her, and now she had no choice but to face them. The next chapter of her life had already begun, written not in ink, but in the cold metal of the chamber behind the wall. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and opened them with a clarity she hadn't felt before. Tomorrow, she would go to North Creek. She would find the storage unit. She would uncover the rest. Whatever it held, whatever it meant, whatever danger it would bring. She would face it. For herself. For her son. For the truth Michael had tried and failed to bury. The morning of the trip to North Creek began before dawn, long before Emma felt ready to face it. The night had offered little rest. She lay awake for hours, listening to the quiet breathing of the house, to the wind brushing against the eaves, to the subtle creaks of wood settling in the darkness, all the while feeling as if her mind were running along the walls of the hidden chamber, circling its contents again and again. Each time she closed her eyes, flashes of Michael's logs, the alias documents, and the photographs haunted her, sharpening into a fear she could neither name nor dispel. By the time the first gray light appeared at the horizon, she felt as though she had lived 2 lifetimes in one night. She rose quietly, careful not to wake Liam, and stepped into the kitchen. She moved mechanically, filling the kettle, reaching for coffee grounds, setting out bread to toast. The familiar motion steadied her, reminding her of the life she had built since Michael's death. Life defined by routines, hard work, and love for her son. Yet underneath that careful stability, there had always been a thread of Michael's absence, a shadow she had learned to live with. Now, she understood that the shadow had never belonged to his absence at all. It belonged to the past he had buried. As the kettle whistled, she sank into a chair and pressed her palms against her eyes, collecting herself. She knew she couldn't bring Liam with her to the storage unit. Whatever secrets Michael had hidden there were meant for adult eyes, and possibly dangerous to uncover. But she also could not leave her son alone for hours without explanation. By the time Liam padded into the kitchen, still half asleep, she had rehearsed her story carefully. He sat across from her, rubbing his eyes, slowly waking as he reached for a piece of toast. "You're up early," he said. "I have some errands today," Emma replied, keeping her tone even. "I'll drive you to school, and I might be a little late picking you up, so you'll stay for after-school program. Is that okay?" Liam nodded, too sleepy to question it. She forced a smile, brushing his hair from his forehead, feeling a pang of guilt bloom in her chest. She had always promised him honesty, safety, openness. Now she was stepping into a part of their life she could not share. Not yet. Maybe not ever. After dropping Liam off at school, Emma sat in her car in the parking lot for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She had written Michael's note, the key, and a slip of paper with the storage address on it in her bag. The metal key clinked faintly each time she shifted, sending waves of tension through her. She started the engine, exhaled slowly, and began the drive. North Creek was an hour away, a small industrial area surrounded by old farms and wide fields. The road stretched quietly, dotted with clusters of trees, stripped bare for the season. The farther she drove, the more she sensed the fragility of the world she had known. The familiarity of her town, her home, and her daily life felt miles behind her now. And ahead lay a truth she was both desperate and terrified to uncover. She reached the industrial district mid-morning. Storage facilities lined the edges of the road rows of identical metal units, painted in shades of dull blue and green. She found the number easily. North Creek Self-Storage. The facility gates were open, and a few pickup trucks were parked near the far end. The air smelled faintly of diesel and cold metal. She drove slowly through the rows, craning her neck until she found Unit 14B. Her car idled in front of it for a long moment. The numbers were faded, the padlock rusted, but intact. She stared at it until her hands began to tremble. The key in her bag suddenly felt heavier than before, as though it held not metal, but lead. She stepped out of the car. Gravel crunched beneath her boots. The wind carried a faint whistle between the storage rows. She approached the unit and pulled the key from her bag. The orange tag fluttered in the breeze. Her heart hammered in her chest as she slid the key into the lock and turned. The padlock clicked open. She swallowed hard and lifted the metal door. It rolled upward with a groan. Darkness greeted her again, deep, silent, undisturbed. She flicked on her flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. It was larger than she expected. Shelves lined the walls, boxes stacked in neat piles, plastic bins, a folding table, a metal locker. What struck her first was the orderliness. Everything was organized with deliberate precision, labeled in Michael's sharp handwriting. Her stomach clenched. She stepped inside, the cold air brushing her cheeks. Dust swirled in the light. She scanned the labels on the boxes. Equipment A, Client Files, Financials, Log Archive, Tools. She reached toward the smallest box, one marked Personal. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside lay items she recognized. A watch she had never seen him wear around her. A lighter with a worn emblem. A small photograph of a woman she did not recognize. In the picture, Michael stood beside her, younger, sharper, dressed in clothes that didn't match the gentle life he later lived. The photo stabbed at her chest, a version of him she had never known. She set the picture aside, unable to process it, and dug deeper. More photographs, receipts, a small notebook labeled Contacts. The realization hit her slowly, but with mounting dread. These were remnants of the life he had lived before meeting her. She placed the personal box aside and moved to the next. The large plastic bin labeled Operational. Inside lay weapons, guns, ammunition, a disassembled rifle. She staggered back, hand pressed against her mouth. She had known he had done illegal things. She had not imagined this. Her flashlight shook as she moved through the unit. Another box contained papers organized into folders. She lifted one, reading names, dates, and coded exchanges. Each page tightened the knot in her stomach. She approached the metal locker next. The door was heavy. She pulled it open. Inside hung a black duffel bag and 2 sets of clothing-dark tactical gear, boots, a jacket reinforced at the seams. She reached for the duffel bag and unzipped it. Bundles of cash filled the inside, stacks upon stacks of bills, neatly arranged, secured with rubber bands, each bundle marked with a date. She inhaled sharply, disbelief washing over her. This amount of money was staggering. She had raised Liam alone for a decade, working 2 jobs at one point just to keep their home. And here, locked away in a storage unit, was enough money to have changed everything about their lives. Her knees nearly buckled at the thought. How could he have kept this from her? How could he let her struggle, let her grieve, let her drown in debt after his death, while this fortune sat untouched? Anger surged through her. Hot, bitter, overwhelming. But beneath the anger came something else. Fear. This wasn't money from savings. This wasn't a side job. This was the kind of money that came with risks, with enemies, with consequences that stretched long after someone died. She zipped the duffel bag closed and placed it back in the locker with trembling hands. "Mom?" Emma froze. She turned so quickly she nearly stumbled. Liam stood in the doorway of the storage unit. Her heart lurched violently. "Liam, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be at school." He stepped inside, confused and timid, hands stuffed into his pockets. "They called you. I wasn't feeling good. I threw up once. They tried your cell, but it didn't connect. I remembered you said you had errands here, so I asked Mrs. Hill to drive me. She didn't want to leave me alone waiting outside, so she followed me until I knocked, and then she left." Emma felt the world tilt around her. She rushed toward him and placed her hands on his cheeks, feeling his warm skin, the trembling of his breath. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be anywhere near—" She stopped herself. She couldn't say it. Not in this place. Liam's eyes widened as he took in the contents of the storage unit, the boxes, the weapons, the stacks of money, the shelves of files. Confusion clouded his face. He looked at her, small and scared. "Mom, what is all this?" Emma swallowed hard. This was the moment she had hoped to protect him from. The moment she had feared from the second she found that first crack in the wall. She knelt in front of him and took his hands. "It's your father's past," she said softly. "Something he should have told us. Something he hid because he didn't want us to be part of it. Something he thought would never matter again." "Was he bad?" Liam whispered. The question crushed her. She took a deep breath, tears burning behind her eyes. "He did things he shouldn't have, before we met. But he loved you, and he loved me. He changed his life. He tried to leave all of this behind." "Then why did he keep it?" Liam asked, voice trembling. Emma had no answer. Before she could speak again, her phone vibrated in her bag. She reached for it, glancing at the unfamiliar number. A chill swept through her. She answered. A man's voice. Calm, deep, unfamiliar filled her ear. "Emma, I see you found the unit." Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly toward the entrance. Outside the storage unit, at the end of the row, a figure stood. A tall man in a dark coat, hands in his pockets, watching them. A black car idled behind him. The voice continued. "We've been waiting a long time. Michael promised us something before he died. And now it's your turn." Emma's hand tightened around Liam's. The past had found them. Everything Michael feared had come true. And now, facing the man at the end of the row, Emma realized the truth with cold clarity. Her fight was only beginning. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay with the channel. Watch the next videos and share this one with others.